constantly badgering them about this Russia thing. I can just see them sitting there going, oh my God, would these guys just shut up? We've already made our decision, for God's sakes. So they told the UK diplomats not to come to India. Meanwhile, they hosted the Chinese foreign minister. That's an interesting development.
Absolutely.
Welcome everybody to a live stream. We're going to go over all the questions we had yesterday. And during our live, we'll try to get to all of those. We will get to all of those. We will get to all of those questions. And we'll answer whatever questions we have coming our way in this stream as well. And hello to our moderators. Hello to our moderators. I saw Spartan Warrior Queen was with us. And who else? I think Spartan Warrior Queen. I think that's it. If I'm not mistaken. Yes. Spartan Warrior Queen. Welcome. Happy Independence Day to all the Greeks out there.
Absolutely.
25th of March. Happy Independence Day. Also in the Greek Orthodox Church, this is the day, I believe, where the angel Gabriel told Mary the good news. So it's a festive day for Greeks. And I don't know if it's other Orthodox, but I know Greek Orthodox celebrate this day as well. And welcome to everybody watching us from Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube, and of course our chat, which is taking place right now on Locals, the duran.locals.com. Alexander, let's get to the questions that we have, which are all related to the news that's going on. And real quick, we also had the NATO meeting yesterday. We had Ursula von der Leyen came out with a statement today, and she said the days of Russia blackmailing us with energy are over. And she was referencing the fact that Russia has said they will accept gas only if they are paid in rubles from unfriendly nations. And of course, that encompasses all the EU. So on this Friday, this 25th of March, I am 100% positive, absolutely positive that when Russia and Vladimir Putin heard Ursula von der Leyen's stern warning and her declaration that the days of Russian energy blackmail is over, that Russia is quaking in their boots and they are ready to drop everything that they are doing and submit to the dictate of von der Leyen. What do you think of her statement?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's just make a simple point. When has Russia ever blackmailed the EU or the West with energy? When have they ever said that unless you do X, we will cut you off, we will cut off your energy supplies? It's never happened. So, I mean, Ursula is already inventing, or at least she's buying into a narrative, which is no reality. The Russians have never at any time disrupted energy flows to Europe, at least not up to now. And if they are now talking about ruble payments for their gas, this is obviously in response to a massive sanctions campaign, which the Western powers initiated. The people who have been blackmailing have been using, if you like, economic tools of coercion to blackmail others, have been the Western powers, and they've been doing it for years with sanctions. And of course, they've done it now with the Russians on a vast scale. So it's a fascinating statement by Ursula, but you're absolutely right. The Russians are going to just shrug their shoulders. I don't know what's going to come of Putin's plan. I read his comments, and I don't think they're quite as clear as people think they are. But, you know, we'll see what comes of it, and we'll see how it works out. But I think that definitely one thing is, I think, sure now, which is that the days of Russian energy flows to Europe are ending. That is not something any European leader ought to be celebrating. It is something they ought to be regretting, because it is going to be ultimately disastrous for Europe.
Well, not for the EU
No,
leaders,
not for
the citizens.
Absolutely, for the citizens, for the industries, for the businesses. We're going to be structurally connected now to much more expensive energy. And countries like India, which you just mentioned, and of course China, and most of the Southeast Asian states are going to be the beneficiaries. And by the way, Ursula made these comments alongside Biden, I understand. You know, they've come up with another plan, you know, to buy LNG from the US. At the moment, the capacity to fulfill all these things just isn't there. Again, you're diverting gas LNG gas from other places. And of course, that can't but have an effect on price. Even if everything goes perfectly well, it would mean that the price of that LNG is going to be higher than it would otherwise have been. And it will be higher anyway than your pipeline gas. And of course, pipeline gas is stable, it's secure, it comes with long-term fixed contracts. It's not decided on the spot market. LNG doesn't work in that way.
Yeah. We're going to have a lot of tankers going back and forth as well. That's
indeed,
for sure.
Well, indeed,
Yeah.
we are. But I mean, the world can absorb.
But it's good for the climate, though. It's good. For
Yeah,
the climate.
well, indeed, well, quite. And of course, by the way, tankers, use rather crude, rather unrefined oils to move around. Apparently, I mean, I got from Tom Longo, by the way, which I didn't know. But the point is, anyway, you have to build the things. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, that's the other thing to say. I mean, you can rush the time frames, and no doubt you can do it. I mean, you can do it fast. But fast is obviously something that's measured in months and years, not in days and weeks. And I gather Robert Habeck, the German economics minister, is now saying that they're going to halve energy dependence on Russia by mid-year. Presumably that means June. Well, yeah. What they're actually doing at the moment is increasing their purchases of Russian natural gas, which is now running at almost record levels.
Well, maybe their plan is to fill up the reserves, I guess, and then
that is their
yeah.
and then package that as you're not buying more because, well, your reserves are all full. So, you can just. So, I mean, but the point is, in the year overall, they will still have to buy an awful lot of natural gas from Russia. Ursula said 2024 will be the year when dependence ends. That may be wildly over-optimistic. And besides, by that point anyway, the Russian energy flows will be diverting eastwards.
Yeah, but what she's not telling everybody, and Olaf Scholz made the same statement. He says we're not going to buy Russian gas in rubles. So he found his spine. He's now talking tough, Olaf Scholz, after he bowed down to Joe Biden and signed up his country to economic suicide. But anyway, the plan is going to be fill up the reserves.
Yeah.
Fill them up as much as we can, and then in 6 months we're going to talk tough and tell Russia, take a hike, we don't need you anymore, and we're going to use those reserves, and they're going to last us for say 6 months, and then after that point we'll have everything built and we'll be completely off of Russian energy, and we'll skate through this. I think that's their plan.
That is their plan,
and they're not going to tell any of the people in Europe that you're going to pay 10 times to 20 times more for your energy. They're just going to forget about that and leave that off to the side. And when the bill comes, they'll be like, well, what are you talking about? It's Putin's fault. We don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. I mean, that is the plan. I mean, you cannot build all these facilities in 6 months. But, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to try. That's what they will do. As I said, the Russians will be moving their energy eastward. I think the other thing, and I'm going to say this very briefly, I mean, I think that the other thing Europeans perhaps ought to be thinking about, though they're not thinking about it, is why did they buy gas from Russia at all? It's because it was cheaper and it was more reliable. They're now committing to buying gas, which is more expensive and less reliable. But that's their choice.
Yeah. What else do we have before we get to any questions? We had the news about Mariupol yesterday.
Yeah.
We have Izum, which they captured the town of Izum.
Yeah.
I mean, my reports are that I'm getting is that the east is winding down. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, I'm getting exactly the same reports. I mean, the forces in the east are being gradually engulfed. I'm going to guess that over the next 2 weeks or so, we will see the final end of the fighting in the east. What happens then is another big question. Importantly, notice again how the media in the West still focusing almost exclusively on what's going on in Kiev. But I did notice that the mayor of Chernigov has now admitted that his city is now completely encircled.
Yeah, and there was also the Verkhovna Rada, the MPs in Kiev announced that they're going to be evacuating the city as well.
Yeah.
Did you get that news?
Yeah, I did get that news.
So if it's going so well for Kiev, my question is, if it's going so well,
Yeah.
and they've got Russian troops surrounded, and they're going to be marching on Moscow any day now, and the Russian government's going to collapse in 3-4 days. Why do they have to leave the city?
Yeah,
The MPs of Ukraine, if it's going so well.
Well, indeed, exactly. Well, precisely. I mean, I mean, it's a rhetorical question. So I'm not going to answer it, but clearly, I am going to answer it. Clearly, things are not going so well. I suspect, by the way, that this is less to do with events in and around Kiev. It's more the gathering crisis in eastern Ukraine, and I think the fact that that's now intensifying in the way that it is. I mean, intensifying, winding down. I think that's causing people in Kiev to be nervous. I think it's also causing people in NATO to get nervous as well. I read a Reuters report yesterday that the mood in NATO was sober. Sober means somber. That's what I mean. And I'm pretty sure that is because they sense that things in Ukraine are not going well.
Well, yeah, because once things start to wrap up in the east, well, I would imagine, no one knows this for sure, but I would imagine all those forces are going to be redirected towards the center and maybe the west, but I would definitely say the center and to the south, Odessa and Kiev. Yes. That would be my guess. Dnipro, Kiev, and Odessa would be my.
I absolutely agree with that. And then, of course, at that point, then it becomes clear the extent of the debacle. Can I just make one very quick point before we get to questions? Just consider where we are and what we might have done just a few weeks ago. Just a few weeks ago, we could have said formally that Ukraine is not joining NATO, and we could have pressed Ukraine to fulfill the terms of the Minsk agreement, which it signed. Had we done those things, the inflation crisis that we're now seeing, the problems with natural gas we're going to have, the problems with oil we're now going to have, the destruction of Ukraine we're going to see, the worldwide spike in food prices that we're all going to see, all of that would have been avoided. I mean, just take that away. We quietly accepting that Ukraine will never now join NATO. It's now, universally admitted. Even Scholz is saying it. We're now accepting also that we're not talking about the Minsk agreement. But just imagine if we just done those things just a few weeks ago, how different the world would have looked today.
Yeah. Okay. Raphael says it is time to take a different approach. Russia is leading the U.S. and NATO to the deep end of the water. Russia is manipulating the situation.
I agree with that. I don't know to what extent they're actually intentionally manipulating it, but that's what we're doing.
Judo. We said it's judo. Yeah. They're using the weight of the West against them. The sanctions weight now being used against them. David S., thank you for your super sticker. Thank you very much. Sampath, thank you for your super sticker as well. And let me scroll down here. I think I saw a question here from Raphael. I am telling everybody this. There is no way Biden would have gone to Poland if Russia did not guarantee safe passage. USA is playing games with us.
I agree with that, actually. I'm sure there are contacts. By the way, it seems that the deconfliction line between the US and Russian militaries in Ukraine is operating at a very, very low level. Apparently, the senior Russian commanders are refusing to speak to the American ones, and that's getting the Americans spooked. But I agree. I think that the Russians have been informed about Biden's visit, and the Russians in turn will have said, look, we're not interfering with it. And so they should. I mean, killing the president or injuring him or doing something like that, that is a World War III scenario, and we shouldn't really want it.
Yeah. Kalio25 says, good morning from Canada, everybody. Who's here first thing in the morning to find out what's really happening in the world right now?
Well, indeed, yeah.
Well, everyone who's here, hit that like.
We're grateful to you for joining us at this early hour from Canada.
Absolutely. Good morning to everyone in Canada. And Biden said that Biden and Trudeau, they're going to be working on solving the wheat crisis. That was his statement at NATO, that he's going to be working with Trudeau to solve everything. So don't worry, everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Biden and Trudeau are on it.
I mean, can I just say, ultimately, I mean, there will be more wheat in Canada, more wheat in US, probably, presumably. I mean, unless things go completely wrong, which of course they might do. And we might see more fertilizer being produced in these countries and all of these things. But bear in mind, every such step is a step away from globalization. just bear that in mind. I mean, you're doing things within your own economy. Maybe you should have been doing them right from the outset. Maybe that's what you ought to have done right all along. But it's been our leaders' deliberate choice up to now to do them otherwise. And of course, they won't accept that. That's in effect, they're reversing the whole line of policy they've been following since the 1980s.
They're deglobalizing without even knowing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Raphael said, so Putin, so in essence, Putin has killed the coup and he's deglobalized in one move, huh?
Absolutely, exactly right.
Raphael says there is no coming back. US dollar is gone forever.
Well, it's not yet gone, but it's going. And I mean, even the IMF are now talking about this. So, I mean, the IMF of all places, they've just issued a report saying that, that the sanctions steps which have been taken have done massive damage to the US dollar's credibility.
Sophia says, what advice would you give to people living in the UK reaching out from Edinburgh? Any way to prepare for what's coming?
I'm not going to give advice. I mean, all I can tell you is this. I mean, I'm carrying on with my life to the extent that I can, and we're budgeting very carefully. That's all I can say.
Yeah, budget carefully, and just keep on having your eyes and ears open, because things are changing fast, very fast.
I mean, the other thing I would simply say, and this isn't advice again, but it's what I'm doing, is that I'm paying all my bills in advance. Fuel bills, energy bills, to the extent obviously that I can do, because I'm worried that in 6 months' time, if I stagger them, they'll be much higher.
Jay Hoden, thank you for that super chat. And let's see here. Celso, thank you for that super sticker. Frank, thank you for that super sticker. And Teaspoon says, thank you guys for your in-depth coverage of Ukraine. I'm originally from Gorlovka, which is not far from Donetsk, residing in the US. Looks like I dodged a bullet.
You certainly did, because apparently it's been a major center of shelling and all kinds of things. And the Ukrainian military is apparently still quite close there, which I find bizarre, by the way. I mean, I would have thought that a really responsible leadership in Kiev would have pulled its troops out of Donbass as soon as the Russians said that they were intervening. And it must be politics that have kept them there. But anyway, Gorlovka, as I call it, maybe I'm calling it wrong, is very much at the epicenter of the battle. So I'm glad that you're well and safe.
Yeah, Ivan, thank you for that. Super chat. Frank, thank you for that. Super chat. Raphael says, guys, Russia is putting a bet to win the next European soccer tournament. Tells us how this conflict is going to end. Russians are meticulous on everything.
I'm sure that's true. But
they did put a bid for.
They did put a bid.
What do you make of that? Are they
well,
trolling?
I think they are trolling at the moment, to be honest. I think that they know perfectly well that the sports bodies, which are now, it's absolutely clear, Western controlled, all the sports bodies, to an extent that I'd never even appreciated, not being somebody who's vastly interested in sports. I say that frankly, but I don't think that they really expect that they're going to be granted this, but it's a way of them showing that they're still there. Ultimately, it'd be very interesting to see what happens, because do they really, is the rest of the world really going to boycott all Russian sports people, and how long does this last?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah,
they really are. I think it's going to last for a long, long time.
I think
we'll see what they do with Medvedev at Wimbledon. I'm curious to see.
Well, indeed.
What the UK does with Medvedev.
Yeah.
HSM says Russian gas is cleaner, cheaper, and more conveniently located and in large supply. The USA cannot match their fracking Ponzi scheme output on any metric.
Absolutely true, but I mean, we're not going to accept that. We're going to, as I said, buy as much Russian gas as we can. Pretend we've done a deal with Qatar, which we haven't. Commit to buying more expensive US shale gas. As I said, that's your choice. You make it. I mean, given up from this point on trying to find any commercial logic in these decisions. It's entirely driven by ideology and a completely warped sense of history. And it just again shows the absolute visceral feeling that people like Ursula and the rest of them have.
David says, do you see Russia at least paying lip service to the eventual reunification of the Russian-speaking territories with Ukraine so as to compromise China's claim, so as to not compromise China's claim on Taiwan?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm not going to try and anticipate what the Russians are going to do, because I think they do have a plan. I don't know what that plan ultimately is, but I think a very, very powerful indicator that they're going to go on moving forward towards their objectives is the fact, and what those objectives are, is that they've introduced the ruble into Kherson region. So if they've introduced the ruble there, it doesn't seem to me that they're leaving. Now, what kind of constitutional arrangements they're looking to make for the long term, I don't know, but it will certainly be one in which it seems to me Kherson region is integrated into the Russian economic system.
Maria Zakharova said, quote, they have already missed the main chance for the existence of Ukraine within their own borders, an independent Ukraine. That was an interesting quote.
It was a very interesting quote. It was a very, very interesting quote. And I mean, I think it's true. I mean, even Biden, I understand, yesterday was sort of admitting that there might be territorial changes with Ukraine, though I don't take those kind of comments from Biden at all seriously. But ultimately, it's not what Biden says. It's not even what Zelensky says. It's what the facts on the ground dictate. And the facts on the ground are that the Russians have introduced the ruble into Kherson.
M. Con Black says, as an Aussie, wondering how much of a jigsaw puzzle of overlords this place will look like. Question, will governments come for gold and silver, as has been done before? Will that extend to gold, sovereigns, eagles, etc.?
It's very interesting, actually, because, they were given an opportunity yesterday to impose more sanctions on Russian gold. And they flunked it. They didn't do it. They said that Russian gold is already covered by the existing sanctions, which, by the way, is not actually true. The central bank itself can't sell gold, but Russian gold can still be sold by others, by middle people, by Russian gold producing companies, by businesses. So that's not actually the case. So I wonder what's going on straightforwardly there. But anyway, I don't think the Russians have any intention of selling any of their gold overseas. I think they want to keep all their gold in Russia so that it can be used there to support the ruble.
Arabian Princess says, a message from God to Putin, Matthew 18:6.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, look it up.
Look at that first. Akli says, whilst Biden is in Europe escalating conflict, Wang Yi visits Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And Lavrov is going to Beijing in a few days.
Yep. Stephen Connor says, what kind of dog does Alexander have?
I've got 2 golden retrievers.
And
brother and sister, by the way.
An unknown poet says, biolabs in Ukraine funded by Hunter Biden?
Well, that's what the Russians are alleging. I mean, I have to say, I think they're trolling a bit here. He probably does have he may have had some kind of financial connection to them. Robert Barnes thought he probably did.
I looked into it a little.
Really? Tell us more.
Well, I mean a little. I mean as much as I could. It's basically Rosemont Seneca. You remember them?
Yeah.
From
I
Russia
do remember.
Gate,
Absolutely.
all those times.
I do remember.
It's that organization.
It's that organization.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, I can't quite see, Hunter as, the sinister mastermind running a bioweapons program. I have to say, if so, then that makes the fact that things can go horribly wrong even more alarming, because I mean, you wouldn't want Hunter involved in anything like that if you're doing it at all, which you shouldn't be. But anyway, we'll no doubt find out more. The Russians seem to have an awful lot of documents, and they are sharing them with all kinds of people. The Chinese definitely have seen quite a few of them.
Tim says, even our small town news is crying over the theater bombing in Mariupol.
No, I know, of course they are. And so they are here in Britain. Though actually, I have to say, most of these stories, I mean, I notice your small town news is talking about it, but they're not really talking about it so much here. And I think the reason is that despite all the talk about, the Russian army being ill-led, mismanaged, weak, and all the rest, they're not prepared to intervene. They're not prepared to send their troops into Ukraine. It looks as if even Poland isn't going to be allowed to. Though we'll see what happens when Biden goes to Poland in a few, later today. I think he's going.
Later today, I think, yeah. Jimmy Jones says, "Is it true that Russia has issued an arrest warrant for Mr. Soros?"
I haven't heard it. I haven't heard about it. I mean, can I just say the churn of news is so enormous that, for all I know, something like that has happened. But I haven't heard about it.
D. Zagerica says, "Gentlemen, what are your thoughts about Bosnia? Serb leader in Bosnia, Milorad Dodik, called Lavrov 4 to 5 days after invasion. After that, he said they agreed to continue the plan. Didn't want to say what the plan is."
No, I don't know what the plan is, but I would say that the situation in Bosnia is getting particularly tense, and given how bad the crisis is in international relations and how outraged the West is, who knows, they might actually do something crazy in Bosnia, which would be a major extending the crisis into the Balkans as well. I mean, I have to say, I'm going to say this briefly. I mean, everything about the West's reaction to what has happened over the last few weeks, it looks like the tantrum of a spoiled child. They're going around smashing the furniture, getting really, really worked up and angry because something has happened which defies them. And when you're dealing with somebody in that kind of mood, well, who knows what might happen in Bosnia? I doubt it will be the Serbs initiating anything.
K1 says, "Are we really about to start another world war over a piece of European dirt nobody could find on a map 3 months ago?"
Well, indeed, quite well. I don't think we're going to go into World War III. I think it's incredibly worrying that some people are talking about it. Carry on.
No, I mean, my point is all of this is happening, as you said, Alexander, for a country that is also not in NATO and not in the European Union. At least looking at this as a European Union citizen, for example. They're not in the EU and they're not in NATO. So why are we getting involved?
Why are we indeed getting involved? I mean, we're getting involved because it's not about Ukraine. It's about Russia. And the Europeans have a massive complex about Russia. They've had it ever since the 18th century. It comes and goes. We're going through a particularly bad phase of it now. But I've come to the conclusion that it's never going to go away, at least not in my lifetime.
Yeah. Joshua says, "Is the West baiting the East into forever wars?"
Oh, that's, I suspect, some people's plan. But I don't think it's going to work out. I think that the situation in Ukraine is going to end. And I think it's going to end in a comprehensive settlement. And there will not be a forever war in the East. They always predict this, by the way. They predicted this over the Caucasus, that the war there would go on forever, that the Russians would bleed to death, that the Chechens would fight them until, well, doomsday. The Chechens are now fighting alongside the Russians in places like Mariupol and elsewhere. They said the same about the Russians in Syria, that the Russians would be bogged down in Syria. Again, it hasn't worked out like that. Bashar al-Assad has just been received in the UAE. So, they imagine these things, but the only people who get drawn into forever wars is us.
Jake says, "I love my country. As outsiders, please tell me your opinion, how to save my country. How to save America." I mean,
okay, I was going to wondering because I was wondering which country. I think, and I still believe this, that at the end of all of this, once this horrible period is done, America will come through. I don't think that. I think that there are forces in America, things in America that will ultimately, the antibodies, if you like, are too strong in the end. And the country is too big and its resources are too great, and the commitments of its people to its constitution and political system are too strong for it to be completely overwhelmed in all of this. But again, I have to say that that's been tested. That proposition has been tested almost to destruction. What can I say? The only thing the thing Americans must do is talk to each other, organize, come up with new ideas, come up with new systems. And to some extent, we're seeing this. We're seeing this, for example, in the new technology structures that are appearing in places like Florida. So you can see that in America, the alternatives still exist. In Europe, they don't. Mm-hmm.
Mac Daddy says, Mr. Christopher, Mr. Mercouris, thanks for being an island of rational thought amidst an ocean of insanity. Love from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Well, thank you for that. I have to say,
Thank you.
I've always found what you call insanity, irrationality, whatever, extremely disturbing and very difficult to cope with. And it's not easy to do. Let's put it like this, what we've been trying to do over the last few days, to keep a cool head in the middle of a tidal wave of hysteria. In fact, it's been exhausting.
Jake says, America had friendly relations with other countries before the Cold War.
Yeah.
Then you for help. Love you all from American farm boy in America. Thank you very much, Jake.
That's so profoundly true. Before the Cold War, America was the most popular country in the world, bar none. During much of the Cold War, for lots of good reasons, it still was. I think Americans perhaps need to understand that that is changing now faster than ever. And this sanctions, this policy of worldwide sanctions is contributing to it. You can see that with the response of governments like India and the ASEAN countries and all the rest, and fanning out your diplomats across the world, making threats to people, apparently personal threats. I mean, this is what I'm hearing from more than one source. Isn't going to make you friends. Even if people are intimidated into doing as you wish, the resentments that must be developing must be enormous.
Mac Hulse, welcome to the Duran community. And Brahim says, from Montreal, do you think after Ukraine, Chinese and Russians sign a pact to defend each other if one is attacked?
Somebody made a point, and I can't remember who it was, that when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin extended their friendship treaty by 5 years, which happened in the summer, they did it only for 5 years. And this is a 20-year treaty. So why did they only do it for 5 years? It suggests that there is a new treaty under negotiation to replace the existing friendship treaty. And that might very well contain military clauses.
Yeah. Taro Man, thank you for that super sticker. Goodvin Depp says, who has Ukraine's gold?
Who does? The United States is the short answer.
HSM Epic says, I don't mind giving advice, house dwellers, solar and batteries. If you live in an apartment, portable energy batteries like Power Oak, Blue Yeti, and EcoFlow charge during the off-peak at night, use during peak.
Yeah, I mean, I understand all of that, and it works in some places. But if you're talking about solar energy, try doing that in London. We've had some pretty good weather recently with a lot of sun, but most of the time here it's overcast.
Jake says, sorry, farm boy in Minnesota, even though I just enjoyed some wine. Oh, wow. I've been to Minnesota. It's a fantastic place, actually.
Yeah. I was talking, just very quickly, I was talking yesterday to Alex and Robert Barnes after we finished our program about how I long to visit all these places in the United States. I know New York very well, but I don't know the rest of the US at all, which is a trying shame and surprising for someone like me who has lived mentally in the United States very often over the course of my life.
Jay Freckles, thank you for that super chat. P says Europe is going deeper into the dark hole as days pass.
Absolutely. You know, there's that famous British phrase, if you're in a hole, stop digging. Well, we're digging ever faster. We're digging as deep and further down. And nobody has the courage to say so or to try to stop this runaway train.
John Matthew, thank you for that super sticker. Alexandros says, what do you guys think is going to be the cope of Western media once it becomes undeniable that Russia is winning the war? How will they spin this? Horonya by the way.
Oh, I'm going to make a guess. They'll say that it was overwhelming weight of numbers finally wore Ukraine down. In fact, I've seen what I consider to be credible reports that the totality of the Ukrainian armed forces actually exceeds in size the forces that the Russians have sent into Ukraine, plus the militias in the Donbass. Now, I say that, by the way, I would point out that we've never had a precise figure either for the size of the Russian forces. You see this figure of 150,000 thrown around, but that's never been confirmed by the Russians. We've never seen a precise figure for the size of the Ukrainian armed forces. But this is going to be the trope, that it was the Russian overwhelming weight of numbers that wore Ukraine down. They said that during the Georgia War in 2008, even though definitely the Georgian army outnumbered the Russian forces. And of course, they've been saying that ever since Russian history began. They said it during the Second World War. They said it during the First World War. They said it during the Napoleonic Wars. It's always overwhelming weight of numbers. That's how they'll spin it.
Yeah, Moro, thank you for that super chat. Steve says the dollar store is now the dollar and a quarter store. Can I get a ruble store? Not in the States, sadly.
No.
Very true. El Bood says, sometimes I hear the dogs barking. I'm worried that someone is coming. I wish you guys will be safe always.
Well, they do bark when people come, usually with delight.
Let's see, where am I? Heyman says, martingale is gambling strategy, not diplomacy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, we are gambling, and we don't do diplomacy. If we'd done diplomacy, we would never have got ourselves into this mess at all. We would have simply, straightforwardly and openly said to the Russians and put it in a document that Ukraine is not joining NATO. I mean, what would it be the cost of doing that? After all, if we're saying in private that Ukraine is not joining NATO, then why not say it publicly and in writing? All that we did by telling the Russians one thing in private and saying something completely different in public is that it made the Russians decide that they were being taken for a ride again.
Devin says, backroom deals with Russia through the Intex system by Germany and France, like with Iran? ?
I don't think so, at least not for the moment. I mean, I'm going to say something, actually, and I think this is a point people in the US perhaps need to be aware of. I compare the media in Europe with the media in the US. The media in Europe is much more hysterically anti-Russian than the media in the US is. I get the sense that it's this huge outpouring of anger that has been building up in Europe for ages within the media and political class. All kinds of decisions were made at the end of the Cold War. There was the assumption that, Russia would become this natural resource, place that, European companies could go. They get all the oil, they get all the gas, they get all the diamonds, all the gold. And the fact that it hasn't worked out that way has been making them ever more angry. And of course, there's some business leaders in places like Germany and Italy and people like that who say this doesn't make any kind of sense. But of course, the political class is not connected to business anymore. And if you're talking about the EU leadership, they're not even elected.
Lady Avshalom, welcome to the Duran community. John Matthews says, hey, Alex, how will this come to a conclusion?
I'll tell you how I think it will come to a conclusion. Russia will win in Ukraine, impose whatever decisions it wants, pivot its economy, its gas and oil sales to India and China. I think the timing of that announcement back in the autumn that the Russians would be building these two big pipelines to China by 2025, I think that's now clearly a sign that things were that pivot was being prepared, because I think they knew what the decisions in Europe were going to be over the next few months. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a complete economic divorce. Russia will become part of Greater Eurasia, which, to be very clear, we must be frank about this, means a Greater China. We will see these two blocks emerge, except that one of them will have its natural resources, its food, its oil, its all of that secure and stable, and the other won't. and we'll be paying a higher price for it.
Alan Shepard said they're building a new chip manufacturing in Germany. I think they know they are going to give up Taiwan.
I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think Taiwan is next.
HSM says for USA elites to adopt Brit Russophobia is insane. It was born over Catherine the Great backing U.S. independence and later Russian Navy providing the Union with coastal protection during U.S. Civil War.
It was absolutely true, and it does go back to Catherine the Great. There's been brief moments when it's abated during the Napoleonic Wars, when they needed Russia, during the period in the run up to the First World War. Though it was never really completely settled during the First World War either, and of course for a very brief period during the Second World War. But basically, the British political class has a massive complex about Russia, which I don't fully understand, by the way, but you don't have to understand something to realize that it's there, and to realize that you have to work with it. Margaret Thatcher, by the way, didn't suffer from it at all. She was different, but she was different from the rest of the British political class in so many things that one should perhaps realize what a unique individual increasingly she was.
HSM says Alexander, with ecological and technological. I live in North Manchester. My solar and batteries are booming as I type.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure you are, but as I said, I mean, I still don't believe that it can replace fossil fuels in anything like the kind of time frame and on the basis of existing technologies.
Hoover, the FUD killer, says Swedish news says Zelensky claims Putin looking to invade the Swedish island of Gotland. Heard anything?
No, I wouldn't pay any attention to anything Zelensky says.
Yeah, Zelensky's. Yeah, jeez. He was probably high when he said it. Orama, thank you for that super sticker. Zach says, a month ago I mentioned Whitney Webb's January interview of Riley W., who said Putin instructed oligarchs to deposit gold in London. Any new thoughts now?
I've never heard about this. I really don't.
That.
I never heard that. I would be very surprised if it was true.
I've heard the opposite about what Putin has instructed oligarchs, who
Exactly.
he wants to return. I'm not saying oligarchs he doesn't want, but people he wants to return. He says the exact opposite. Deposit everything in Russia.
In Russia, certainly that's been the public thing. And by the way, the fact that the Russian stock market rose, they were trying to pretend this is sort of a Potemkin village thing, and it was the state bank buying shares. I've actually seen a breakdown, and it does seem to have been private investors and professional investors in Russia, and that's logical because they can't invest now in the West. So where do they invest? In Russian assets.
Alex Mack says, do you think Ukraine could have avoided the war if they agreed to Russian terms? And if they agreed to the Russian peace terms now, would the war be over, or Russia won't stop and carry on taking over the whole country?
I return to what I said. If Ukraine and the Western powers just a few weeks ago had said that Ukraine is not going to join NATO, which Ukraine has now formally admitted it won't join NATO, and commits to fulfilling the Minsk agreements and is prepared to sit down with the representatives of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as it said it would do when it signed the Minsk agreement, there wouldn't have been a war and the world would have been different. These very simple things would have changed everything. Ukraine refusing to do that is going to lead to the destruction of the Ukraine we knew, and the West refusing to press Ukraine to do that is going to change the balance of power, the correlation of forces, if you prefer, in ways that are going to be very bad for the West.
All right. Toast, thank you for that super chat. Rocky Luck says, how will the EU-NATO be unwound after Ukraine's defeat?
We will wait and see. I read a very interesting article in the Quincy Institute's Responsible Statecraft, which said that once the dust settles from this conflict and Ukraine is defeated, NATO will suffer a major credibility problem, because by essentially inviting Ukraine to join NATO at some unspecified date and taking the stance it did over Ukraine, it gave everybody the impression that Ukraine was a vital interest. And the fact that it hasn't defended Ukraine, because of course it can't, is going to make many of the East European states nervous about how much they can actually rely on the core NATO states to really fulfill their promises to defend them. So we'll see what happens.
Ralph says, BlackRock chief quoted in Epoch Times, quote, "The Russian invasion of Ukraine has put an end to globalization we have experienced over the last 3 decades." Fink wrote in a March 24th letter to shareholders. Thanks for your work.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. I mean, some people can see it.
Yeah. He's not a good guy either, but at least he sees it.
Sometimes bad guys are very clear-sighted, more clear-sighted. Then you don't have being a bad guy and a fool. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. Anthony Madsen says Switzerland. What about Switzerland? The most sanctions put on Russia was from Switzerland.
I know, and I think that really does beg the question, a lot of questions about how real Swiss neutrality is anymore. I mean, compare this with what happened during the Second World War, when Switzerland did try and preserve genuine neutrality. I have not been surprised about this. My own feeling was that Swiss neutrality became a fiction many years ago.
John Matthews says,
Zara might have some interesting things to say about this.
John Matthews says, thanks. How will Germany replace Russian gas?
Well, according to Robert Habeck, they're going to import it from Qatar, and they're going to buy more from the US. They're going to buy 15 billion, whatever it is, cubic meters of gas. Except, of course, as was pointed out in the run-up to the war by the energy companies in the US in discussions with the Commerce Department and the Treasury Department and the administration, the capacity to increase production in the US is limited. The situation in markets is tight. Maybe over time they can do it, but that would inevitably mean that they'd have to go back on some of their green agendas, which I suspect the Democratic Party is going to find very difficult to do. But who's to say?
Yeah, and then how much is it going to cost everybody?
Oh, well, indeed, yeah.
That's the real important question. They'll be able to find gas, I guess, but how much is it going to cost everybody?
That's right. I mean, we're not going to. We might have disruptions. We might see blackouts. We might see problems with diesel oil. But ultimately, there will be gas. There will be oil. The point is at what price?
Jake says, either of you come to Minnesota, idea to be more than willing to show you the rural area I'm from and would love to have you. We can work out. Contact privately, however you want. Love you both from the Duran community. Thank you, Jake, very, very much.
I would love to do it. Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. Orlando, thank you for that super sticker. Moro, thank you for that super chat. Freedom Autopsy Report says, it's been reported China is colonizing the Solomon Islands. Battle of Guadalcanal 2.0.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Chinese are making their moves. And I think this is a lot of misunderstanding about this in the West. I think that people in the West some of them still hanker this idea that the Chinese can be diverted from their path. I think what the Chinese have seeing is that they're going to be sanctioned and attack themselves before very long. I think they recognize this for the runaway train that it is.
Yeah. Gurvidip says, any chance of the BRICS or a group of Eastern countries running a parallel system to SWIFT?
I think there are already parallel systems to SWIFT. China has an enormous one. Russia has its own. India does too. By the way, I believe Japan also has a kind of interbank messaging system. The point is, and Iran also does, by the way. The point is, up to now, all of those haven't been integrated with each other. They now will be. I think it's only a question of time, and that's probably going to happen much faster. In fact, it's surely going to happen much faster than creating new energy, LNG facilities and things like that. Because it's a question of time, linking up existing systems. I'm not saying that's going to be completely straightforward, but you can do it Whereas obviously building LNG facilities, building the ships to ship all this LNG is going to take time.
Jeff says Russia is leveling eastern Ukraine in preparation for a partnership with China to rebuild to modern standards.
Well, there's a thought. Possibly. We'll see.
Youngblood says Clinton Global Initiative starts begging for money at the same time Trump files his lawsuit against them, and more information is released from John Durham investigation. How much of a coincidence is that?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's a coincidence or whether, they're beginning to worry about their situation. It's going to be a very interesting court case. Always with these court cases in the US, the problem is getting courts to hear them. You remember what happened during the election battles, that the courts repeatedly refused. They found all kinds of procedural reasons to avoid litigating, to avoid considering litigation, which they would have found politically embarrassing. And that's going to be, I suspect, the same problem with this case.
Mikasa Ackerman says, what do you think are the chances of Poland going to Western Ukraine, number one, with, and number two, without Russian approval? Could Biden quietly approve it?
Well, I possibly. We'll just have to wait and see. My sense is this is rather less likely than it looked a few days ago, but I wouldn't discount the possibility that it may happen. We're still on a runaway train. But can I just say, at the moment, it's very interesting. The West, the runaway train is the sanctions. On the military things, they've so far been much more restrained because the military people in the Pentagon are so I think, alarmed about this. Zelensky again asked the British apparently for things like tanks and aircraft, and even the British had to say no.
Matthew says, which EU countries do you think will fare better through EU-Russia conflict?
None. That's as simple as that.
Hungary. If I had to choose one.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, but
one. If I had to choose one off the top of my head.
One. Yeah, exactly. They want to keep. They want to continue to receive gas, and they might. Okay, but of the big ones, Germany, France, Britain, Spain, Italy, they're all screwed.
Yeah, and that is if Orban wins. So I'll even put a caveat there.
Absolutely.
If Orban wins. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Alexandros says, here in Germany, we've reached a point where being mildly pro-Russian will get you attacked, even physically. How bad is the brainwashing?
Absolutely. Same here. Same here in Britain, by the way.
Miss Huff and Puff says, China and Pacific Islands currently drafting security agreements. Not sure how deep these agreements go, but perhaps China stretching west out.
Absolutely true. And I think that what is happening is going to cause the Chinese to accelerate whatever plans they might have had with respect to Taiwan and with respect to strengthening their economy to withstand sanctions pressure.
David says, my concern World War III is based on two things. Neocons know it is now or never to stop the rise of China and Russia and think the U.S. can win a nuclear war or at least lose less than Russia and China.
I think that underlying your point that there is a fundamental truth to this. I think the neocons and their fellow travelers in Washington, and even people who don't think of themselves as neocons, but who are very influenced by that type of thinking in the US, sense that this period of global US hegemony is ending. And this is basically their last desperate throw to keep it alive. If you read the Chinese media, that's exactly their analysis. Whether they'll go all the way to a nuclear war, well, I hope not.
Ryan says, this conflict shows decay and destruction of Western democracies. Look at the US and NATO. They used Ukraine as a pawn and still will lose. Not only lose Ukraine, but pushed every other country to China in a shift of power.
Absolutely correct. Every neocon venture, and to be very clear, ultimately, this is a neocon venture, another one. Every one of them fails, without exception. They all end up leaving the United States and the West in a weaker position than they had been previously.
K1 says, why have we already forgotten about the 30 plus US funded biolabs in Ukraine? What do you suppose has become of them?
Well, the answer is that in the West, we may choose not to talk about it. Elsewhere, they're talking about it all the time. So I don't think we've forgotten about it. I think that what has happened is that there's been a major effort to divert the whole discussion away from those biolabs by talking up the possibility of a Russian false flag. And of course, we've discussed in programs on the Duran how that could very, very easily translate into a Ukrainian false flag.
Samuel says, what will the consequences for Finland be if Finland joins NATO? The opinion for NATO has changed a lot this last month.
Yeah, I know, I understand that. I still don't think it's going to happen. But if it does, it'll mean that Finland is on the front line in an area of the world where it will be in, under a great deal of pressure. But I don't think it's going to happen in the end, actually. I think Sweden has quietly ruled it out, and I think Finland will also. And notice that we've just had a NATO summit, and there was no discussion of it there.
Yeah, Darko, thank you for that super sticker. Rockbus, thank you for that super sticker. Spectre in the air, you guys are awesome. I do appreciate your long hours since this all started. Congratulations on your new daughters.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those kind words.
And Zach Boyle says, any chance it was bait for Frozen Reserve play?
Absolutely. It might very well have been. In fact, I think that's a very high probability that the idea was to create a crisis, seize the Russian reserves, assume that it's all a Potemkin House of Cards economy, provoke an economic crisis in Russia. That will bring down Putin. And then, of course, you've broken Russia and you can advance on China. I think that's very likely what some people thought. And bear in mind, the Wall Street Journal has now confirmed that that whole plan of freezing the reserves and sanctioning the central bank was cobbled together by a small group of staffers within the administration, without the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve Board being properly consulted about it. Well, the Fed wasn't apparently consulted about it at all. So very likely that was the plan. It hasn't worked out like that.
Yep. Valley S is in the house as well, and so is Alan Watson. Great to have you here with us. Yeah, it was a team called the Tiger Team is what you're talking about, right?
The Tiger Team, exactly.
Yeah.
Who are now apparently who are now busy strategizing about nuclear war, apparently.
Yep.
Which is, it tells you the kind of people we're dealing with.
FL64, thank you for that super sticker. Bella, thank you for that super sticker. RDDR says pro EU yet pro Bandera, or pro Stalin yet pro Tsar. What's wrong with nation building in the East?
Well, so true, yeah.
Not intimidated says, here in New York, love your channel. Thank you for telling the truth. Keep up the great work. Thank you for that. Peter, thank you for that super chat. Freedom Autopsy Report says, is the famous step spring mud now a factor in the Russia-Ukrainian war?
Oh, indeed. Well, quite. I don't think it's ever been a factor in the Ukrainian war, to be honest. The idea that the Russian military cannot operate in conditions in Ukraine when, Ukraine was for so long part of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union is just ludicrous. I don't take that seriously.
Rory says, Clinton Comey 2024, let's put our foot on the accelerator and see how fast we can destroy our civilization.
No, so true. Yeah.
So true. Asavet MD, thank you for that super chat. Goodvin Deep says, who has Ukraine's gold? Actually answered that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The US has it. It was shipped to the US.
The US has it all. Yeah.
Where's it all? Yeah.
Yeah. Sparky says there may be a shift in power back to the states as a result of the U.S. federal government elites destroying themselves. This isn't difficult and is a good thing.
I agree with that. I hope it happens. I presume you mean within the United States itself. I hope it happens, but we're not there yet. So let's see. But I agree, it is one of many possible outcomes to this. Caliu25
says the cat video bombing. Alex's update yesterday was priceless. Do you have cats at home, Alex or Alexander? Even though I know you have dogs and babies, so I imagine your home is pretty busy as is.
I have 2 cats, I have 2 dogs, and I have 2 babies. So there you go. The cats and the dogs, by the way, get on fine. There isn't any problem between them at all. So contrary to what people say about cats and dogs, my cats and my dogs get on perfectly happily with each other.
FL64, thank you for that super sticker. Balki says, Blinken and his arrogance from ignorance elite. They talk about we will not allow China.
Absolutely true, and I think that's exactly right. By the way, some of you who may have heard, joined us for One Life recently, will have remembered that Alex was commenting about Niall Ferguson and the fact that he overheard a senior official, talking about how the only way that this ends is Putin's fault. Putin falls. I have good reason to believe that was Blinken.
Blinken, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Sparky says elites can no longer ride grandfather's coattails.
Absolutely true, and that's where they don't really understand. I mean, look at them. You look. I mean, we're talking about Blinken, but Sullivan perhaps even more. I think Gonzalo put it best. You know, they have become so accustomed to a world system, an economic, social system created by earlier generations of Americans and Europeans, that they take it for granted and they don't understand how unsteady its foundations are becoming.
Richard, thank you for that super chat. Uncle Vanya says, looking forward to catching up on your take on the NATO summit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I will tell you straight away what I thought about it. A damn squib, actually. I mean, they all met. We were all wondering what they would come up with, but they didn't really, in the end, say very much. They did repeatedly ask for a ceasefire in Ukraine, which suggested to me, by the way, that they are actually fully aware of how brittle Ukraine's position is becoming. And though I don't think it was intended that way, these demands or requests for a ceasefire toward the Russians came across to me as rather plaintive. But having said that, you know, we've also got the EU summit meeting, which is underway at the moment. And we've also got the Biden visit to Poland. And perhaps those are where the real action is going to be.
Sparky says Facebook tells NPCs how to be a good girl daily. Very true, Sparky. Marone says, what about the end user certifications on weapons sent by the West? Are they not violating those?
Well, of course they are. And we're talking about thousands of these things. By the way, I have it on very good authority that though the javelins have done some damage, the stingers have been almost completely ineffectual against the Russian Air Force, which flies too high for them. So we got thousands of these things floating around Ukraine. Where will they end up? And end user certificates? Forget about those. I mean, the short amount of time in which all these weapons have been pumped into Ukraine, there hasn't been the time to really sort out things like that properly. Even if you had, I mean, that still wouldn't prevent them finding their way into all sorts of places.
Yoav, thank you for that super chat. Francis says, real politics suggests a pragmatic, no-nonsense view and a disregard for ethical considerations. Pragmatism is good, but not disregarding ethics.
I completely agree. And I think this is a very important point I want to make. On this program, we are realists. But realists should not be confused with what the Germans call Realpolitik, which is based on a very cynical view, both of human nature and of power politics and stripping out ethics and all of those sort of things. The opposite to realism is not idealism, which is as some people say. The opposite to realism is unrealism. It is being unrealistic. I mean, you've got to always be pragmatic. You've got to always take into account the actual underlying realities. But being a realist doesn't mean that you embrace unethical and cynical things.
Commander Crossfire says, according to a poll, 80% of vaccinated Canadians support even stronger actions against Russia up to and even war, and 85% of Canadians are fully jabbed.
Well, I'm not sure about all of these statistics, but it is undoubtedly the case, or so I've heard, that those who've taken the jab are more likely to be belligerent towards Russia than those who haven't. Does that surprise you?
Talix says, what do you guys think of this news? Russia to accept Bitcoin as payment for energy exports.
I heard about that. I don't take that vastly seriously, by the way. I think it was said by a rather middle-ranking official, and I saw it on Zero Hedge. I checked it out on the Russian media, and it isn't there.
Yeah. Francis says globalism introduces a single point of failure with nations in charge of their own affairs. You have competition and better resiliency for the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
InfoSeeker says Biden admin gave China a wealth of intelligence on Russia prior to invasion. Beijing gave it to Moscow. News Target. Any comment?
Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, I think first of all, I mean, what was the Biden administration doing, giving intel like that to China? Did they really think that the Chinese were going to phone up Moscow and say, please, 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 the Americans are giving us all this information?